As McCluskey's cult classic sophomore album McLusky Do Dallas turns 20 years old, I can't help but think that if a record like that came out today, trailed by the 1 minute and 51 seconds roller coaster of detonations that is lightsaber sucking blues,
I'm fearful of flying, and flying is fearful of me.
then they'd be dominating the BBC Six Music playlist and being heralded as one of the best new bands in the UK. So why didn't that happen in 2002? And what's that got to do with good shoes? Here's what. Welcome to 2020 Sound, the channel where we take a look back at some of the more cult aspects of indie and alternative rock history. Give us a subscribe if that's something you'd like to watch more videos about. As the linchpin that links the entire output of McCluskey, Future of the Left and Christian Fitness together, Andrew Falkus, known as Falco to most, has been consistently involved in putting out some of the most enjoyable music this side of the millennium across a slew of cult classic albums. But he's also proven almost as successful at dodging wider attention as he has been at writing indelibly iconic lyrics like
All of your friends are cunts, your mother is a ballpoint pen thief.
maybe playing abrasive and predominantly American-influenced alt-rock with more than a healthy dose of very British and very absurd humour running through it is just too niche for mass tastes. Or, as some have suggested, maybe McCluskey dodging the spotlight had more to do with the industry's criteria for being a marketable rock band being especially focused on hairstyles and footwear at the time. But we'll get to that in a bit. First, a quick recap as to why so many people enjoy this music in the first place. Named after original Beatles drummer Pete Best, the band that would become McCluskey formed in Cardiff in 1996 and went by the name of Best, before settling on the name McCluskey in 1999 and a lineup featuring Falco on vocals and guitars, Matthew Harding on drums and Jonathan Chappell on bass and vocals. The following year saw the release of their brilliantly titled debut album, My Pain and Sadness is More Sad and Painful Than Yours, featuring the singles Joy and Rice is Nice, capturing some of the band's lo-fi punk charms. But it was a trip to Chicago to record with the legendary Steve Albini that resulted in the record that truly put them on the map. 2002's McLusky Do Dallas is where the ingredients that made them special arguably came together best, combining catchy melodies and riffs with pummeling noise, Albini's red raw sounds and lyrics that stretch from referencing the 1986 World Cup to questioning it's like an anvil being dropped on someone's head in a cartoon. Absurd, colourful and violently entertaining. And by rights it should have propelled them to much greater exposure. But the band seemed to occupy this space whereby they both kind of made sense in the context of what was happening in the early 2000s music scene, but also totally went against what was trending. At the Drive-In's success had finally brought post-hardcore into the spotlight in 2000, almost as a more highbrow alternative to the new metal of the time, which saw a modest increase in coverage, in the UK at least, for bands who pulled from a similar well of high-impact underground American rock. The likes of 100 Reasons, the Icarus Line, Andrew Will Knows by the Trail of Dead, Rival Schools and more. McCluskey perhaps made most sense in that context, although the earnest emo of 100 Reasons, for instance, was still a world away lyrically from a man screaming the name of 90s British media personality. But by 2002, coverage of those kinds of bands was already waning as the year prior, the Strokes stepped into the void left by At the Drive-In's implosion, and to use the rather cringe-worthy name The Enemy labelled it with, the new rock revolution began. But even amongst those the bands, the Hives, the Vines, the Datsuns, the Von Bondis and so on, McCluskey's flavour of alt-rock didn't really feel out of step. The first time I heard To Hell With Good Intentions, it just sounded like an instant classic.
My band is better than your band. We got more songs than a song convention. Sing it.
And Lightsaber's frantic hooks don't sound out of place next to something like The White Stripes' Fell in Love with a Girl, for instance, which was a sizable hit at the time.
And that gun's in my hand and I know it looks bad, but believe me, I'm innocent.
The problem was perhaps less to do with the music and more to do with the shoes. In 2002, Conor McNicholas became the editor of the NME, and with him came a particularly amusing edict. In a 2017 Vice article, McNicholas said, "In 2002 we owned the scene completely. Britpop was owned as much by the tabloids as by NME, the whole Blur versus Oasis thing, whereas we owned a scene that nobody else could get inside. I ran it as a very visual paper. I basically said, I'm not interested in putting anybody into the magazine who doesn't have good hair and good shoes. It doesn't matter how good the music is, I can't get excited about a band that doesn't look good." That conversation that we'd had with record industries, the signals that we put out, record labels knew if they wanted to get into NME, they needed to look f***ing great. At the time, Falco had no hair at all, let alone great hair. McCluskey's charms lay in their output, not the cut of their jib. And articles in places like The Quietus in recent years have suggested that this is one likely reason why they didn't attract more coverage. There's a fun podcast and Facebook group some of you may like called Temporary Fandoms, in which the participants explore a band or artist's entire discography, and they've done this with both McCluskey and Future of the Left. And after the McCluskey episode, their manager Craig Brooks shared some anecdotes in the group that shed some light on what was going on behind the scenes and how superficial things really were. Of the NME's new policy, he wrote, "This is the kind of crap that was really going on and at every level of the industry, not just the bands. An A&R bod who signed another band I worked with and who also tried to sign McCluskey told me he was working in the label post room until a senior exec concluded that he had a cool belt and so probably knew what the kids were into and made him an A&R manager. There was a lot of style over substance going on and McCluskey just wouldn't play that game."
But sometimes straight up misfortune would strike the band. For instance, after messaging Craig to ask if I could use his quotes, he also sent me a great Spinal Tap-like anecdote about a show the band played for the NME at the Garage in London around this time, sandwiched between the headliners Liars and openers the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. He wrote, "Every form of industry were there. It was a standalone show and they were coming from Cardiff for it on the day. Harding was the band's usual driver. They were due at about 4:30 for soundcheck. At about 2:30 I got a call from Falco. Harding had had a panic attack and couldn't drive. They were on the hard shoulder of the M4, but it was okay, as Chapel would drive the rest of the way. So at about 3:20, I got another call from Falco. Chapel had now had a panic attack and couldn't drive. They were now stranded on the M4 hard shoulder, as Falco couldn't drive and both other band members were having panic attacks. Falco said, "We've called the AA." I said, "I don't think they do this sort of breakdown." At this stage, I was outside the garage and we were at a loss. The Liars tour manager was a guy called Mitch and he drove the Liars van to Reading Services, which the AA had recovered the band to, collected them and the gear and drove them back to Highbury Corner. They arrived about 15 minutes before stage time. We couldn't open the venue doors as the Yeah Yeah Yeahs were playing and there are sound restrictions, so we had to set up all the gear in the street. The instant they finished playing, we opened the doors, ran the gear onto the stage, and the band played with no line check, never mind a sound check. The gig ended up being great.
The band managed a couple more brilliant singles in 2003 in the form of There Ain't No Foolin' Ferguson and Undress for Success.
There is no one to defy it. Undress for success. He's underexposed and dead. Wrong now.
But by the time of their final album, 2004's The Difference Between Me and You is I'm Not On Fire, Harding was gone, replaced by Jack Eccleston. But with Eccleston's arrival on the drums seemed to come a bit more sophistication. Whilst lacking some of the memorable melodies of Dallas and the previous year's singles, I think Fire introduced a little more rhythmical variety, perhaps allowing Falco and Chapel to stretch their legs a bit, resulting in stuff as varied as the psychobilly beats of KK Kitchen's What Were You Thinking? The offbeat cymbal syncopation that underpins Without MSG, I Am Nothing.
Get Carter to the phone. Don't teach him how to cook. That'd kill him.
There was more turmoil on the horizon as 2004 also saw the band lose £20,000 worth of equipment when their van was stolen from a motel in Phoenix during a North American tour. But one of the most interesting turning points in their relationship with the US around that time was revealed by Craig Brooks in the Temporary Fandoms Facebook group, when he wrote that the Beggars group who owned 2 Pure, the label McCluskey was signed to, had some massive artists, largely on XL, but they didn't handle these acts in the US. The group was consciously trying to change that and was seeking to retain acts globally. For that reason, when Brett Gurewitz himself expressed a wish to sign McCluskey in the US and license Do Dallas to Epitaph, beggars refused and did that record and The Difference themselves. Just to jump back in here, Epitaph, for those who don't know, is one of the most commercially successful independent labels in the world. Formed by Gurewitz, the guitarist from Bad Religion, it's known primarily as a punk label, and in 1994 released what I think may still be the biggest selling independently released album of all time, Smash by The Offspring, which has sold at least 11 million copies worldwide. Suffice to say, they almost certainly did not do the job Epitaph would have. We didn't get the cachet of the label itself, didn't get to tour with Epitaph bands, and didn't get an Epitaph budget for anything. The band slogged around the US playing small shows in a tiny van. I recall one scheduling nightmare that had them drive from, I believe, San Diego to Denver. It was over 1,000 miles. When they got to Denver, they played to 96 people. That sort of thing will strain relationships. And indeed, in January 2005, the band called it a day. Chappell went on to form Shooting at Unarmed Men, whilst Falco and Eggleston formed Future of the Left. You've had different members over the years, but for their first and arguably best two albums, were joined by Kelson Mathias, formerly of the band Jar Crew, on bass, backing vocals and keys. Taking the noise, irreverence and wit of McCluskey as a starting point, Future of the Left brought in more melody, more complexity, more variety, bigger choruses, synths. If McCluskey was like eating a good quality slab of alt-rock meats like a fillet steak, then Future of the Left was a little more like fine dining. There's more layers to appreciate. And for all the love McLusky Do Dallas gets, it's Future of the Left's debut album, 2007's Curses, that remains my favourite Falco-related release. It's just got so many songs that instantly made an impression on me and still sound like they should have been hits to this day, from Mancasm to A Dead Enemy Always Smells Good.
Your pity sets the bar so white.
2007, Future of the Left may have been, for my money, the best band in the country. And I remember the reviews for the album being great, but it didn't seem to translate into greater coverage, more features, more exposure. Perhaps it's partly due to the music industry always being obsessed with new blood, that a band like theirs that wasn't entirely new, but rather a reconfiguration of existing artists, wasn't going to be afforded the same levels of excitement in the music media as an entirely new act would. And it can't have helped that the wider popularity of bands with guitars in the UK was like a bottle of milk on the turn. The commercial success of the native scene the Enemy had been pushing for the last 5 years, around the likes of The Libertines, Franz Ferdinand, Block Party, etc., was declining, and by 2007 you were pretty much left with the dregs. The party was over. Over the next 10 years the band saw a little change. Mathias left the group in 2010 to be replaced by former Million Dead member Julia Ruzicka, and Jimmy Watkins also joined on guitars. But one thing that stayed the same is the group continued to put out some fantastic music. 2009's Travels With Myself and Another has some of their very best songs, including Arm in Eritrea.
Come on, Rick, I'm not a drunk, I know my own worth.
And the great recycling anthem that is Stand By Your Manatee. 2012's The Plot Against Common Sense, which famously attracted a middling review from Pitchfork, followed by a brilliant and highly entertaining rebuttal from Falco, still boasts a lot of thrills. Goals in Slow Motion, and Anchor being amongst them. The band's most recent albums, 2013's How to Stop Your Brain in an Accident and 2016's The Peace and Truce of Future of the Left, were both funded by fans via Pledge Music campaigns that revealed the depth of appreciation and support for this group when both hit their funding targets within just a few hours. And again, there's lots to enjoy in both, from the melancholy of French lessons,
reading you like a pamphlet that I picked up from an idiot,
to the towering stomp of Back When I Was Brilliant.
Completely, especially anatomically blown up.
The band's still going, but in 2014 the corpse of McCluskey was revived, initially just for some benefit gigs. But in 2022 it's really nice to see Falco and Eggleston joined these days by Damien Sale on bass, getting the chance to revisit those songs in front of an audience in the context of the modern day British indie scene, because it feels like so many of the bands getting attention and playlisted on Six Music at the moment are descendants of McCluskey. Idols are the most obvious example, but also the likes of John x2, and even Yardak's sense of humour reminds me of them. Joy Zine recently reviewed the band's Do Dallas anniversary show in London, stating, "Idols have brought this kind of music to the mainstream in recent years. Today, Idols play a huge stage at Coachella to 100,000 plus adoring Insta fans. Those are 100,000 plus potential adoring McCluskey fans who just don't know it yet." And I think it's kind of hard to disagree with that. The work of both McCluskey and Future of the Left deserves to be heralded alongside this next generation that they've likely influenced. And it's wonderful to see that they've still got a fire under them to reach for greatness. As Falco told The Guardian, "I don't believe in half conviction. If you're not going on stage to be the best band of the night, one that renders all the other acts irrelevant, then don't even get up there." And those are some pretty good intentions that I hope won't be going to hell anytime soon. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know your favourite McCluskey and Future Left songs and albums in the comments. And if you like this video, do please give it a like and share it with anyone else who you think may enjoy it too. And if you'd like to watch more videos along similar lines of underappreciated, overlooked, whatever you want to call it, aspects of indie and alternative rock history, then do please give us a subscribe.